questions without notice, and I give the call to the honourable member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. In a leaked video reported in The Australian just before question time, the Minister sensationally claimed that Australia has an obligation to foreign criminals. Minister, what is Australia's obligation to foreign criminals?
Call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the co-chair of the Parliamentary Friends for Refugees for his question. I'm pleased to advise the House that a short time ago I spoke with New Zealand Deputy Prime Minister Peters.
Order. The Minister will pause. The Minister will pause. Order. I can't hear a word the Minister's saying. So we're just going to reset, not the clock, but reset for the Minister to continue on.
Thanks, Speaker. A short time ago, I spoke with New Zealand Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters. I spoke to him about the changes our government will soon be making to strengthen community safety in Australia. I conveyed to him that Direction 99 has not been working as intended, and that we will be revoking Ministerial Direction 99 and issuing a new revised direction to make sure that the protection of the Australian community outweighs all other considerations.
The Minister will pause. Has the Minister concluded his answer? Order. Members on my left. Order. The member for Bright will cease rejecting. So we can hear from the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. How will the Albanese Labor government's investment into the resources sector deliver a future made in Australia, and are there any barriers to that agenda?
Call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Hasluck for her question. The natural resources of this great continent are literally the bedrock and the starting point for a future made in Australia. Yeah. The Prime Minister recently announced in Western Australia the groundbreaking Resourcing Australia's Prosperity program. Our government is investing $3.4 billion over 35 years for Geoscience Australia to find new deposits of minerals and sources of energy to build a future made in Australia. Yeah. This is the largest investment of any Australian government in pre-competitive geoscience, the science and exploration for the resources we need to get to net zero. All of the minerals and the rare earths we needed for essential supply chains and green technology needed for net zero are all found here in Australia. We just need to know where to find them, as Australia is 80% underexplored. This is a generational investment in the science underpinning the resources sector and is an absolute game changer. Along with the 10% critical minerals production tax incentive, this is the most significant budget for the resources sector in this country ever. And if companies, we must remember, if they don't make a value-added product, they don't receive a tax credit. It is an incentive based on success. And we've also committed over $10 million of planning for critical minerals common user facilities and partnerships with the states and territories, who have welcomed these initiatives, as I might add, have the Liberal and National leaders in Western Australia. So what is standing in the way? What are the barriers to these policies, I am asked? Well, to be frank, Mr Speaker, it is the Shadow Treasurer and the Leader of the Opposition and probably the whole of the LNP of Queensland. Now, I wonder if they'd taken the time to ask the Queensland Resources Council what they think of these policies. If they had, they would know that Jeanette Hewson, the CEO of the QRC, has said the critical minerals production tax incentive, funding to progress common user facilities and $566 million to Geoscience Australia to develop new data are all important announcements that will benefit our critical minerals industry. And those opposite, Mr Speaker, pretend to be a friend of the West, but nothing could be further from the truth. Because maybe they would have consulted the Chamber of Minerals and Energy in Western Australia. As CEO Rebecca Tompkinson has said, it is pleasing to see the federal government adopt CME recommendations such as the production tax incentive for critical minerals and funding for common user infrastructure. Now, the QRC and the CME of WA are hardly the stalwarts of support for the Australian Labor Party, but they know a good policy when they see it. What we know is the opposition choose not to act in the national interest but in their own self-interest. They want to offshore Australia's future. We will make a future here in Australia.
The call to the honourable member for Deakin.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the NDIS and Government Services. With shocking revelations out of budget estimates last night that illicit drugs such as heroin, cocaine, speed and ice are being trafficked through the NDIS, with the NDIA officials admitting, and I quote, "You name it, it's on the list." Why has the minister allowed illegal drugs to be trafficked to Australia's most vulnerable and paid for by taxpayers under the scheme that you designed?
The call to order. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Deputy Prime Minister will cease interjecting. The Minister for Climate Change. The Minister doesn't have the call. The member for McEwen is warned. Interjecting before a minister even begins her or his answer is highly disorderly. Give a call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance and
Thank you, Speaker. I want to acknowledge the member for Deakin's inaugural question to me on the NDIS in this term of government. The NDIS is changing lives, and I actually think that most members of the House are very committed to seeing the NDIS deliver the outcomes that it was designed to deliver for people with disability. But the NDIS needs to be got back on track. And the member goes to one of the questions about the future of the scheme, which is making sure that every dollar gets through to the participants for whom it's designed. I agree that there are issues in terms of fraud in the scheme. But these issues of fraud did not start yesterday. The reality is that this scheme was initiated by Labor, and then the Liberals came into power, and there's no doubt that they increased the size of the scheme. But the problem with what they did is I would have to mark their stewardship of the scheme as incompetent and naive, because they failed to create systems.
The Minister will pause. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting, and the Minister for Climate Change and Energy is not helping the situation. The member for Deakin is entitled to raise a point of order, and he has the call.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. The minister should stick to his very expensive script, and it can't be relevant to be speaking about drugs that are being sold.
No, I'll deal with it. No. I thought this was clear yesterday when I dealt with the member for Fairfax. The minister will just pause a moment. He'll just resume his seat for a moment. We're not going to have points of order with statements and the standing orders being abused. I made that crystal clear yesterday with the member for Fairfax. As I just indicated to him, he was entitled under the standing orders, and of course he's allowed to do that. So I think he knows the next course of action is that he will leave the chamber under 94A for abusing the standing orders. And the minister's going to return back to the question. He wasn't asked about alternative approaches. He wasn't asked about the opposition. He was asked a specific question regarding estimates and issues raised through the estimates process. I'm just going to make sure he's remaining directly relevant to the question.
Thanks for your guidance, Mr Speaker. I was asked about fraud in the scheme. I'm explaining the origins of it. The reality is that the NDIS is a good idea, but under the coalition it was badly managed. And one of the naive mistakes they made is that whilst they paid out money to participants and service providers, they failed to do anything about the system into which they were paying it. So we have 87% of service providers are unregistered. We have no idea of knowing what they do when they put in their invoices. We also have a scheme where they didn't set up proper monitoring of the payment system. I explained recently to the House that, to my shock and horror, I discovered upon becoming Minister for the NDIS that when a payment application was made, a request to be paid, I found that the agency under the previous government, and we've rectified this now, would only check 20. That's 20 out of hundreds of thousands of claims daily. And then I found out in particular that between 5 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. on any given day, nothing got checked. They literally decided to get the money out so quickly that if you made a claim between 5 and 6...
The Minister will pause. He's had 2 minutes, and I gave an instruction before about referring... I can understand he's bringing some history into this issue, but it wasn't about the history of what he's talking about. It was about a specific matter raised in the estimates. So he's going to have to address that, otherwise he'll be resuming his seat.
We are getting on with fixing up the fraud. We have got about 500+ investigations, compliance matters under investigation. We have 222 investigations underway. We have 20 prosecutions in the court. We have another 12 matters currently with the DPP to consider. And clearly, anyone claiming items which are not allowed under the scheme, it is illegal. The one difference between us and those people opposite is we're doing something about fixing up the scheme. You did nothing.
Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. What has been the response to the latest analysis from the CSIRO, which has once again confirmed that nuclear is the most expensive form of energy? Oh, great.
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member, who is a fantastic member for Aston, for her question. And, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member knows, GenCost is a report which has been issued annually by the CSIRO and AEMO since 2018. And it has consistently found nuclear energy to be the most expensive form of energy available and slow to build as well. Now, between 2018 and 2022, this was an uncontroversial report, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the previous government used to source and cite GenCost in their report to the Paris Accord. They used to reference it. But this is no longer the case, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition was asked about GenCost in March and about its findings that nuclear is the most expensive form of energy, and he said, and I quote, "It is a discredited report, not to be relied on, and it's not a genuine piece of work." Now, this is the alternative Prime Minister of Australia talking about Australia's premier scientific organisation, Mr. Speaker. Did he reflect on his policy and say maybe we need to reconsider? No. When the Leader of the Opposition sees a report telling him he's wrong, he attacks the CSIRO. Much like when he sees a news report he doesn't like, he attacks the journalist on Twitter, Mr. Speaker. That's his modus operandi. That's how he behaves as the alternative Prime Minister. But he's not alone. The architect of this policy disaster, the member for Fairfax, had something to say about GenCost. He was asked originally about GenCost. He said, well, the CSIRO hasn't released its modelling.
Order.
And he called on the CSIRO to release their modelling. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's a certain irony here. The architect of the plan,
member for Fairfax,
says we haven't seen the modelling. Well, we haven't seen the opposition's policy either, Mr. Speaker. Now, that takes some chutzpah. I've seen some chutzpah in my time in this place, but that takes a yellow cake, Mr. Speaker. That level of chutzpah takes a yellow cake, because this is an opposition which is treating the Australian people with contempt. And, of course, the member for Fairfax then had a little chat to the CSIRO. He gave them a little TED talk explaining where they're wrong, which I'm sure they welcomed. I'm sure they welcomed the member for Fairfax telling these experienced economists and scientists why they've got it so wrong. But the CSIRO has responded by saying, we stand by those figures based on the best global information and applied to local conditions, which allow a meaningful comparison of future energy costs generated by various technologies in the Australian context. Now, is it any wonder, with all this chaos and the opposition attacking Australia's premier scientific organisation, that coalition backbenchers are calling their policy, and I quote, bonkers and bewildering? That is perhaps why the Leader of the Opposition hasn't had the guts to release it. He said he'd release it in a couple of weeks, 12 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker. He says, oh, we won't be held to your timetable. He won't be held to his own, which is just another reflection of the fact the Leader of the Opposition...
Before I call the member for order, before I call the member for Goldstein, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Her Excellency Elizabeth Clogar, the new Ambassador of the Republic of Austria. And I'm pleased to inform the House that present also in the gallery today is the Honourable Lisa Singh, a former Senator, CEO of the Australia-India Institute, with Marjorie scholars Suena Kumar and Roya Sinha, and also in the gallery is Lucas Patchett OAM, co-funder of Orange Sky Australia, and the Honourable Andrew Fraser, former Deputy Premier of Queensland and Chair of Orange Sky Australia. Welcome to you all. I give the call to the Honourable Member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Women across Australia are not getting the legal support they need to escape or recover from family, domestic or sexual violence. The independent review of the National Legal Assistance Partnership, released last week, has recommended that funding for women's legal services be separated from the general community legal centres stream. A dedicated funding stream would ensure that legal assistance reaches victim survivors of gendered violence. Will the government support this recommendation?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Goldstein for her question. The Albanese government recognises the pressures that all legal assistance services, including women's legal services, are under, and the importance of strengthening the sector. Legal assistance is essential to ensuring access to justice and equality before the law. Since becoming Attorney-General, and while in opposition, I've visited many women's legal services across the country. I know how hard they work. I know the importance of the work that they do. For women fleeing violence, women's legal services provide advice and support to keep them from harm. The National Legal Assistance Partnership between the Commonwealth and the states and territories is a 5-year agreement to fund vital legal assistance services for the most vulnerable Australians, including women's legal services. It expires on the 30th of June 2025. Dr Warren Mundy was commissioned jointly by the Commonwealth with the states and territories to review the current agreement and to make recommendations to inform the new agreement. Dr Mundy's review has now been publicly released. It will help inform the negotiations for the new partnership agreement, which is due to commence on the 1st of July 2025. Negotiations with the states and territories will continue over coming months to shape the new agreement. I would note that $44.1 million of urgent funding was announced in the budget for the legal assistance sector. The government understands absolutely that this will not fix all of the issues currently facing the sector, but it is an acknowledgement of the resource and workforce issues. It's intended to directly assist with wage parity issues that have beset the sector for some time. This urgent funding will relieve some of the pressures until the commencement of the next partnership agreement.
Give a call to the honourable member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What actions is the Albanese Labor government taking to ensure we can make more things here in Australia? And is there any opposition to building our future here?
Call to order. Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank very much the member for Macon for the question. And indeed, we have delivered a budget that was focused on two things. Firstly, helping with the cost of living without adding to inflation, and we've seen this week the increase in the minimum wage of 3.75%. So we know that, together with our tax cuts for all 13.6 million taxpayers, we will be able to deliver people earning more and keeping more of what they earn. And in addition to that, of course, we have cheaper medicines, the latest element of which was signed yesterday by the Health Minister with the Pharmacy Guild. In addition to that, the budget focused on how does economic growth continue in the future. And we know that we need to always plan forward and look for where those opportunities are. And we do have an opportunity to build our future here in Australia, becoming a renewable energy superpower by investing in solar and wind and new energy, by investing in manufacturing and critical minerals, by investing in skills and TAFE and universities, by creating jobs in our suburbs and our regions and making sure that whilst our resources being exported will continue to be important to us, where we can, how do we move up the value chain? How do we add value first and create jobs rather than just export the resources, wait for the jobs to be created somewhere else and then pay a higher price when that comes back to us? So we need to use our resources to make things here. Building energy security, it builds economic security, but importantly as well, it builds our national security. Now, we see the shift to renewable energy as a whole-of-nation opportunity, and it demands a whole-of-economy approach. And that's why our production tax incentives for companies that produce things like hydrogen and critical minerals is so important. This is an incentive payment that delivers based upon success. It rewards success. A simple and practical idea that has sent those opposite into a tailspin and divided their party. What is their response to making more things here? Well, the Leader of the Opposition says we can't have manufacturing without nuclear power. No reactor, no start from this bloke is what his plan is. It's a false choice he's trying to force on Australia. We know that the CSIRO has said this won't be ready till 2040.
Order.
And as the member for Macon knows, it's a decade ago that those opposite told the car industry to leave Australia, to leave Adelaide and to leave Australia and take the jobs with them. Well, we support jobs here and a future made here.
The call to the member for Wannon.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. The Western Australian newspaper has just published a report that yesterday another non-citizen described as having a long criminal history, including kidnapping, reckless conduct, endangering life, and being a reported associate of Tony Mockbell, has escaped deportation because of Ministerial Direction 99. Minister, have you cancelled his visa?
Call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Wannon for his question. I have, over the last week, cancelled 35 visas, and there are more under review. I am aware of the case that the Shadow Minister refers to, which was decided by the AAT yesterday, and it is under consideration in accordance with the national interest. I note again, though, that these are cases where my department had maintained the cancellation of the visa under the ministerial direction, unlike under the member, the Leader of the Opposition, where there were 1,298. And one of them the Prime Minister went to yesterday, an individual with convictions for a sexual-based offence in relation to a girl under 14 and for repeatedly breaching bail conditions. Now, the opposition there failed. He failed. They don't want to hear about this, Speaker. I wonder why not.
Order. The member for Groom. Has the minister completed his answer? Okay. I don't need to have sound effects. The member for Wannon on a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker. It just goes to relevance. The question was very specific, was whether the minister has cancelled the visa of this associate of Tony Mockbell.
Order. On the point of order.
To the point of order, Mr Speaker, what the minister is doing is a direct compare and contrast. A direct compare and contrast between whether people were under ministerial direction having their visa cancelled or whether under ministerial direction people were being released. That's the difference. And when it's a direct compare and contrast, that has always been within direct relevance.
Order. Members on my right. We're just going to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, just on the response that the Leader of the House has given, he's effectively just admitted that the minister was breaching standing orders. It was a very clear, direct question, and the minister needs to deal with the direct question he was asked.
So whilst the Leader of the House is correct about some compare and contrast, he'll need to make sure his answer is relevant with the direction, whether it be Direction 90 or as a result of Direction 90, which was before Direction 99, involving the decisions involved, not simply just to talk about the past, to make sure his answer is directly relevant with the decisions that he's made, in particular with this case. I was pretty clear on what the minister should be doing, and I'll listen carefully, but out of respect for the member for Wannon and his seniority, I will grant him the call.
Ministerial Direction 99 was what it was specifically related to.
Yes, but I'm aware of that, but before 99 there was Direction 90, which preceded that. So I understand the issue, but thank you for your assistance, Member Wannon. Order. The minister has the call.
Thank you for your assistance, Speaker. I say again, I'm aware of the case that the Shadow Minister referred to. It was a decision handed down by the AAT yesterday. It is under consideration in accordance with the national interest, as is the case. I also say that there are other cases which have been overturned by the AAT, in particular the one the Prime Minister referred to in question time yesterday. This is a case where the opposition leader failed to do anything after the AAT overturned a decision, and it's now alleged the individual in question went on to reoffend very, very seriously. On Saturday, I did what the opposition leader should have done and cancelled this individual's visa.
Order. The member for Paterson has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. How will the Albanese Labor government's Future Made in Australia plans benefit regional Australia, and what challenges stand in the way, Minister?
The call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much to the member for Paterson for that question. She, of course, is a very strong advocate for jobs in her region and knows that a future made in Australia will deliver benefits for all of regional Australia. Whether it be renewable hydrogen, solar panels and batteries, green metals or critical minerals processing, our Future Made in Australia plan is all about jobs in the regions. And a great example of that is low-carbon liquid fuels. Right now, 60% of Australian canola exported to Europe is used to produce biofuels, and we export 400 kilotonnes of our tallow, largely from our abattoirs, to Europe for the same purpose each and every single year. Australian feedstock being shipped offshore, creating jobs overseas, with some of that final product being re-imported here into Australia. Our Made in Australia plan will see more of this product being transformed here in Australia into sustainable fuels for our planes, for our ships and for our heavy vehicles. Our budget will see more investment in local projects and innovation. We are creating the building blocks for this industry right here in Australia. We will consult on demand-side measures, and we will shortly be engaging with industry on the final form of a production incentive to kick-start local manufacturing of sustainable fuels. And you would think that growing new Australian jobs and industries, particularly in our regions, would unite this parliament. But no, this is all opposed by those opposite, who have confirmed that they will not support the future made in Australia, including the development of a low-carbon liquid fuel industry. Now, why is that? Well, of course we know that they have form when it comes to opposing Australian manufacturing and Australian industry. We know they killed the car industry here in Australia. They, of course, notably had a defence minister who said that they wouldn't trust Australian industry to build a canoe, and now they have a shadow treasurer who spent his entire pre-parliamentary career advocating against local jobs. On this side, we support Australian industries. We have local content rules in our infrastructure, and we have local job and training requirements too. On their side, they have a shadow treasurer who calls support for Australian industries a wasted effort. That's what he said to the Minerals Council of Australia when he was advocating the scrapping of local content policies with the closure of aluminium refining in Australia. while this government is working to deliver a future made in Australia, particularly in our regions, the coalition wants, yes I have, thank you, wants a future made overseas.
Order. Give a call. Order. Members on my right. Give a call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. The latest ABS monthly data shows domestic inflation is growing at 5 times imported inflation. It also shows core inflation increased to 4.1% in April, which is higher than the UK, the US, Japan, Canada and the euro area. After 3 failed Labor budgets driving up the price of groceries, electricity and mortgages, will the Treasurer finally admit, as the RBA Governor has pointed out, that inflation is homegrown?
Order. Before the Treasurer begins his answer, the member for Barker is on a warning, and I know he wants to stay to hear this answer, so he won't be interjecting at all during this answer. Great. Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, if he's angry at inflation with a 3 in front of it, he must be absolutely filthy about the 6% that they left us with. When we came to office, Mr Speaker, inflation had a 6 in front of it. Now it's got a 3 in front of it. It's still too high. We acknowledge that it's still too high with a 3 in front of it, but it's almost half what we inherited from those opposite. And I think that, more than anything, Mr Speaker, explains why the Shadow Treasurer hardly ever gets any questions, because the truth is that when we came to office, there were bigger deficits. There was more than $1 trillion in Liberal debt. We were paying too much in interest on the debt. We had almost nothing to show for all the waste and rorts for which the Shadow Treasurer was the poster child in the former government, Mr Speaker. And so we have spent 2 years cleaning up the mess that we inherited from the—
will pause. And the member for Hume will state his point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Relevance. The Treasurer has been begging for a question about his budget that sank without a trace. You made an excellent earlier ruling about history. Can I ask you make a similar ruling in this instance?
Well, the question contained information regarding the budget, inflation and a whole range of other points. And I'm just going to make sure, so far the Treasurer has been directly relevant. Well, you can't ask about data and questions without the context of that, so I'll allow him some latitude, but he's being directly relevant in terms of the topic and the issue. You may not like the answer, but he is being directly relevant, and he won't be going through a history of what's happened in the past 10 years, but he's obviously able to talk about how we've got to where we are. So the Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, without a hint of self-awareness, the Shadow Treasurer talks about something that's sunk without a trace. Mr Speaker, the least relevant person in the parliament wants to get up and talk about relevance, Mr Speaker. Now, he asked me about inflation and he asked me about the budget. Now, the budget was designed to put downward pressure on inflation. And our responsible economic management is one of the reasons why inflation is almost half what we inherited from those opposite, when the Shadow Treasurer was the most embarrassing part of an embarrassing government, Mr Speaker. So inflation is lower now than when we came to office. We've turned 2 big Liberal deficits into 2 Labor surpluses. We've improved the bottom line by $215 billion, Mr Speaker. Debt this year is $150 billion lower than what we inherited. Next year it will be $185 billion lower than what we inherited. That means we'll avoid $80 billion in interest costs on the debt that they racked up, Mr Speaker. And because of all of that, because of that responsible economic management, we are making welcome and encouraging progress on the big economic challenges that we inherited when we came to office 2 years ago. Now, Mr Speaker, I am the first to acknowledge that we would like inflation to moderate further and faster. We've made that clear on a number of occasions. And that's why the budget has cost of living help, which is designed in a way to be part of the solution to our inflation challenge, not part of the problem. It's why we're managing the budget in a responsible way, cleaning up the mess that we inherited from those opposite. At the same time, as we recognise,
we've also got a growth challenge in our economy as well. So we're fighting inflation without smashing the economy. We've seen some progress since we came to office. If those opposite were still in government, inflation would be higher, debt and deficit would be bigger, and the economy would be even weaker.
Call to the order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government making it easier for patients to see a doctor with urgent care clinics? Why is it so important to invest in Medicare after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Lyons for his question. At the last election, he and the rest of the Labor team promised the Australian people that if elected we would strengthen Medicare through a boost to bulk billing, through cheaper medicines and through a network of urgent care clinics. And we've been busy on this side delivering on that promise. In less than a year, our 58 urgent care clinics have already delivered care to 425,000 Australians, all fully bulk billed, 1 in 4 of them under the age of 15, 1 in 4 services delivered on the weekend when we know people can't get into their GP, and taking real pressure off our hospital system. The member for Lyons and I were at one of those clinics in Hobart last month, and we were told by the operator that 80% of their patients said that if the clinic wasn't open, they'd have had to go down the road to the Royal Hobart Emergency Department, to the Emergency Department. So the member for Lyons and I were there, Mr Speaker, to announce a $28 million strengthening Medicare package out of last month's budget. The package includes more funding for the 4 terrific urgent care clinics already operating in Tasmania, helping them care for more Tasmanians, but it also includes funding for a 5th clinic in Tasmania in the Bridgewater area, Mr Speaker, servicing not just Bridgewater itself but also surrounding communities like Brighton and the northern suburbs of Hobart. And I want to pay credit, Mr Speaker, to the member for Lyons, who has been a relentless advocate for this clinic in his electorate. The Tasmanian package, Mr Speaker, will also deliver better support to older patients, helping them avoid having to go to hospital in the first place if possible, but also, if they do have to go to hospital, allowing them to be discharged as soon as clinically possible. This is not just good for them, Mr Speaker. We know it will relieve much-needed pressure off the hospital system as well. The member for Lyons knows this. The government knows the Tasmanian health system is under real pressure, which is why our strengthening Medicare program is just so important. Not just urgent care clinics, Mr Speaker, but in just 5 months, the GP bulk billing rate in Tasmania has climbed by 5%, delivering tens of thousands of additional free visits to the GP, the best result of any state in the Federation, Mr Speaker, and tens of thousands of Tasmanians are benefiting from cheaper medicines as well. We know there's more to do, Mr Speaker, but we are starting to repair the damage from the Leader of the Opposition's horror health budget of 10 years ago, when he wanted to cut $50 billion from hospitals, abolish bulk billing altogether, jack up the price of medicines by up to $5 a script. But that's not the Labor way, Mr Speaker, because the DNA of Labor includes Medicare at its heart. That's why we're working so hard to strengthen it.
Give the call to the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Data from West Australia's Regional Price Index shows costs have risen sharply in regional WA. Halls Creek resident Sarah told ABC News, and I quote, "We can't even buy the food to keep them going because it's too expensive." Tom Price business owner Ted said, and I quote, "My milk I used to buy was $3.70, now it's $6.20. Will the Treasurer finally admit Labor's inflation is homegrown?"
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A couple of important points about that question. As I acknowledged in the answer a moment ago, we know that people are under pressure, whether it's in Western Australia, indeed right around Australia. And inflation was much higher when those opposite were in office, but it's still too high now. And that's why our budget is so focused on making sure that we're providing cost of living help to people. Now, if the honourable member was serious about these cost of living pressures, she would enthusiastically support our efforts to give a tax cut to every taxpayer in her community and right around Australia. if she was serious about these cost of living pressures,
Order.
she would enthusiastically support our energy bill relief for every household in her community and in our community. She would enthusiastically support an increase to the minimum wage. She would enthusiastically support our efforts to make medicines cheaper. She would enthusiastically support our efforts to cut student debt for students right around Australia. We know that people are doing it tough. We know that people are under the pump, and that's why our budget was so focused on fighting inflation without smashing the economy. And a key part of that, arguably the most important part of that, is cost of living relief right around the country, including in WA. And it would be remiss of me, Mr Speaker, getting a question from WA and following from the Minister for Resources a moment ago, to point out how substantial the support is for the West Australian economy in the budget. Probably no budget, certainly not one that I've been here for in the last couple of decades, Mr Speaker, has been more focused on the vast economic and industrial opportunities of the Western Australian people and workers and businesses and investors. And it beggars belief from a party that pretends to support Western Australia that since we released the budget, with all of its focus on WA industries, that those opposite couldn't find it within themselves to support WA and support—
Call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government responding to the challenges in our economy in a responsible and balanced way, and what approaches have been rejected?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thanks to the member for Dunkley, not just for her question, but for helping to ensure that every one of the 73,000 taxpayers in her community will get a tax cut. Every one of the 65,000 households in her community will get energy bill relief, and tens of thousands of workers will get a pay rise next month as well, Mr Speaker. We know the economic conditions are challenging and that people are under the pump. The Treasury forecasts in the budget anticipate weak growth in our economy because of higher interest rates and global economic uncertainty. And that's what economists are expecting to see in tomorrow's national accounts, which cover the first 3 months of this calendar year. Now, Mr Speaker, we'll see the details then in the data tomorrow, but already the impact of the interest rate rises is showing up in the consumption data and the retail trade data that's already been released, and in building approvals and in the softening of the labour market as well. Now, Mr Speaker, some of the most hawkish commentary we see completely misses the fact that the economy is already soft and people are already under pressure. As I said a moment ago, our strategy is to fight inflation without smashing the economy. Our responsible, measured and methodical economic management is carefully calibrated for the combination of challenges that we confront together. And it would have been absolutely mad to slash and burn in the budget in these circumstances. It would have been crazy to tighten the screws even further on a soft economy and on people who are already doing it tough. Now, those opposite, they made a mess of the budget, and now they describe things like the indexation of the age pension as overspending. No wonder nobody takes them seriously on the economy, Mr Speaker. Our approach is much more responsible and methodical and measured than the free advice that we get from those opposite and from elsewhere. Our strategy is about putting downward pressure on inflation without crunching the economy. It's all about turning Liberal deficits into Labor surpluses, getting debt down and paying less interest on the debt. It's all about investing in the industries which will power a future made in Australia. And it's all about tax cuts and energy bill relief and cost of living help designed to ease the pressures that people are under and to support our economy when growth is weak, Mr Speaker. So we'll see the national accounts tomorrow, but it is already clear that our responsible economic management is exactly right for the combination of challenges that we confront together in the economy. And if we took the approach recommended by those opposite, inflation would be higher, deficits would be bigger, Australians would be under even more pressure, and the economy would be in worse shape.
Before I call the honourable member for Wentworth, I'm pleased to advise the House in the Southern Gallery today are senior school captains visiting from the Hills Christian College in Burnham in South Australia in the member for Mayo's electorate. Give the call to the honourable member for Wentworth.
My question is for the Minister for Health. The census attack at Bondi Junction on April 13th left 6 people dead and traumatised my community. The perpetrator experienced severe mental health problems and had fallen through the cracks of our mental health system. Since the attack, I have been contacted by the family and friends of many others experiencing complex mental health conditions. They are desperately worried about their loved ones and they are crying out for more support. What is the government doing to support those with the most complex conditions and to fix our broken mental health system?
Give a call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Wentworth for her question. I want to pay tribute to her representation of a community that's been doing it so tough, particularly over the last several months. She and I and the Leader of the Opposition were at a gathering of, I think, about 10,000 members of Sydney's Jewish community, so many of whom live in her electorate, in the days after the heinous terrorist attacks on October 7, and we saw firsthand in those early days the grief and the horror and the trauma experienced by that community, which has been compounded by the horrific rise in anti-Semitism. And your representation and your compassion to your community has been extraordinary. And on top of that, your community has had to deal with the horrific attacks at Bondi Junction and the trauma that has reverberated through your community in particular, but right through Sydney and to a degree Australia as well. And I really appreciate the engagement that you've shown to our government in trying to design what supports we can to help your community through this period of trauma and grief and dislocation. Obviously, a series of programs that have been subject of negotiation with the New South Wales Government as well. But you're right to say, and family members of victims of the Bondi Junction attack have pointed to the gaps and, frankly, the very large gaps in supports for people with severe and persistent mental illnesses. And this has been an enduring discussion in Australia since the deinstitutionalisation processes of 30 years ago, frankly. Many people with severe and persistent mental illness, including psychotic disorders, receive terrific supports from the NDIS, but too many, we know, fall outside of that system. Many of the psychosocial programs that were in place before the NDIS were rolled into that scheme, and frankly we're just really trying to hold up that population through schemes that are intended to operate for a period of time while we design an alternative set of arrangements. They in many cases are not cracks, they are very big chasms for support. States are undertaking unmet needs analysis as part of an agreement with the former government that I applaud. We know this is going to number tens and tens of thousands of Australians not getting the support that they need. This will be a very big focus of the foundational supports process that the Minister for Social Service is leading with states and territories. We're trying to do what we can through the Strengthening Medicare agenda. I see the New South Wales Government made some announcements today for additional supports following Premier Minz's commitment as part of the coronial inquest to do better, as the Prime Minister said, for us to do better for a group that frankly has not been sufficiently supported in the past 30 years in spite of the broad promises to do so. I thank the member for her engagement on this important issue.
Call to the member for Bean.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government building our skilled workforce in vital areas like housing, construction, the care economy and renewables, while also supporting more people into well-paid and secure work? Why is this action so desperately needed?
Give a call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thanks very much, Speaker. Can I thank the member for Bean for his question and indeed his strong advocacy for the vet sector across the country. Can I say this too? Speaker, when we came to government, we inherited the worst skills shortage in more than half a century. The shortage is extended across the labour market and were as deep as they were wide. That's why we convened the Jobs and Skills Summit. And, Speaker, that's why last year alone more than 355,000 Australians enrolled in fee-free TAFE, and a further 320,000 places from this year on are available in areas of demand. It's why we struck a national skills agreement with state and territory governments, the first national skills agreement in a decade. In a decade, you did not sign up one agreement in the skills area, not one, not one. $30 billion. We're also giving more support to apprentices and employers because in the opposition's when they were last in government, their last budget cut support.
The minister will pause. There's far too much noise on my left, and he will direct his remarks through the chair and not use the word "you." The minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. In their last budget, they cut support for apprentices and employers, and we've actually attended to that because the Albanese government knows that apprentices need more support, not less support. Under a Labor government, from the 1st of July, the new first-year incentive for those employing apprentices in priority areas will increase by $1,000 than that was proposed under the Liberals' last budget, while apprentices will receive $5,000 in direct financial support, an increase of $2,000 than that planned by the previous government. And of course, from the 1st of July, every apprentice in this country will receive a tax cut, and they would not have received it under those opposite. In contrast, of course, the opposition have called fee-free TAFE wasteful spending. They don't support the new energy apprenticeships. They don't support the extra 20,000 fee-free TAFE places in the housing and construction sector. In fact, they don't support any investment in energy or housing. You think as the country battles through the largest skill shortage that we will bequeath, they would have something to say about skills. But in the budget reply speech by the opposition leader, employer groups rebuked the opposition leader with the business.
The minister will just pause a moment, so I just resume his seat for a second, so I can hear from the leader of the opposition on point of order.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's on relevance, and the member started out very zen and calm, but he's now elevated to a point where he's quite unhinged and unhelpful for the order of the House. He wasn't asked about alternative policies. If he could just calm down, take deep breaths, find his inner self, he could answer the question appropriately.
Order. The minister just paused. Order. You know, there's two problems that I have just the way that was done. Order. First of all, it was a reflection on a member. We had this debate last week where the manager of opposition business was crystal clear about the repeated practice, as he said, of undignified personal attacks on the 30th of May. So we're just going to ensure that that doesn't happen again. And the minister is being directly relevant, and that is against Standing Order 90 to use a reflection on a member. So I just hope everyone remembers that. We had this discussion last week, and I hoped when I said at the time on questions and answers it would improve. I'm just going to remind everyone again of that statement the manager made last week. Order. Well, you never know your luck. You never know your luck. Give the call to the minister.
Well, thank you, Speaker. Well, I won't be taking anger management lessons from the leader of the opposition, I assure you. Anger management lessons from the leader of the opposition. Speaker, when it comes to skills,
Order.
The employer bodies have said that the opposition leader has no clue. They called his budget reply, and I quote, a momentous act of economic self-harm, and indeed Business Council actually said that it will compound our existing skill shortages and make it harder to do business. Speaker, I don't need no anger management lessons from you, I assure you.
Order. The member for Braddon. The manager of opposition business has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Yesterday in question time, the minister was asked if the ABF drone fleet remained grounded. The minister chuckled at the dispatch box and responded, quotes, "This was dealt with by estimates, in estimates by ABF, and I invite you to look at the transcript." Close quotes. The minister knows this was not an accurate statement. Why hasn't the minister advised the House of her latest mistake?
Give the call to the order. The member for Bruce, the member for Werriwa. The order, whatever's happening up there, can stop immediately. The Minister for Home Affairs and Cybersecurity has the call.
Thank you so much, Speaker. The Shadow Minister is incorrect. The last public statement on this matter was made by ABF at estimates, and I'd encourage him to review the transcript.
Give the call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government's Homes for Australia plan helping improve housing affordability? And what could block future progress?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank our terrific member for Macquarie. I know that she knows that we're working to address the housing challenges that we inherited from those opposite, Mr Speaker. Our Homes for Australia $32 billion plan will help boost our country's housing supply and ensure that more Australians have a safe, affordable place to call home. Indeed, more than $6 billion for Homes for Australia in the most recent budget, Mr Speaker, including a $1.9 billion increase to the Commonwealth Rent Assistance. This is the first back-to-back increase in more than 30 years, Mr Speaker, to help the nearly 1 million households who are doing it tough right now. But of course, we know the best way to deal with housing affordability is to add to supply, and that is what we're focused on. That's why we're working with all tiers of government and the housing sector to meet the ambitious national target of 1.2 million homes by the end of the decade. We've put billions on the table, Mr Speaker, to help the states and territories boost their supply and to reduce the red tape, including, of course, through the $2 billion Social Housing Accelerator. And of course, this investment is already helping Australians into homes, like the one our Prime Minister visited in Sydney last week, where across New South Wales now more than 700 people have a safe, affordable place to call home, thanks to funds from the Social Housing Accelerator. This is life-changing for those people, Mr Speaker, and it shows what is possible when you work with the other tiers of government. Of course, we all need to have our shoulder to the wheel to meet this national target. And last week, the Housing and Homelessness Ministers' Council, the states and territories signed up to a $9.3 billion new housing agreement, Mr Speaker. It is only by working together that we will boost supply and provide more help for home buyers, more help for renters and more help for Australians that need a safe, affordable place to call home. Mr Speaker, this is of course in stark contrast to those opposite. They didn't want to work with the states when they were in government. They're saying they're not going to have a target for building homes. They, of course, voted against the Housing Australia Future Fund. They conspired with the Greens there to hold it up for at least 6 months. And now we have the Shadow Minister coming in here today saying that homes won't be built under the fund that they voted against, Mr Speaker. They're, of course, opposed to Help to Buy in this House. That'll be coming before the Senate shortly. And, of course, they don't have a plan for housing at all, other than, of course, their rehashed thought bubble, which we got from the Leader of the Opposition. We got not $1 new for one new home, but we did get Ranger Super for housing again, Mr Speaker, something that he knows will drive up house prices, something that he knows won't build a single home, and of course we know it will wreck people's retirement. Mr Speaker, while they're full of negativity, we're going to get on and build the homes that Australia desperately needs so that more Australians have a safe, affordable place to call home.
The call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Right now, LGBTIQA+ people can be fired from their place of work if they come out. The Prime Minister reportedly told Caucus there are 2 ways for your government's anti-discrimination bills to pass Parliament, one with the Coalition and one with the Greens. You've given the Coalition draft legislation, but not the Greens or the crossbench, despite repeated requests. Will you commit today to providing us with a copy of the legislation so that we can work with you to pass it?
The member for Moreton. Give a call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. The Albanese government believes that no Australian should be discriminated against because of who they are or what they believe. The government is seeking to enhance protections in anti-discrimination law in a way that brings Australians together. In essence, what the government wants to do is to prevent discrimination against people of faith, including vilification protections, to protect all students from discrimination on any grounds, and to protect teachers from discrimination at work while maintaining the right of religious schools to preference people of their faith in the selection of staff. It is in the interests of all Australians that there be an enduring solution that strengthens protections for all Australians, including students, teachers and people of faith. and that's why bipartisan support is so essential. We want to get this done. We want unity, not division. The Prime Minister has reached out to the Leader of the Opposition to get this done, and I continue to look forward to working with the Opposition to progress legislation if that is possible.
Give a call to the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How is the Albanese Labor government working to address the chronic undervaluation of gendered work in Australia, including in aged care, and helping Australian women to earn more and keep more of what they earn?
Call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for Canberra for her question and for being such a strong advocate for women in this place and in Canberra. If you've visited an aged care home or an early learning centre, like all of us on this side of the House have, you know that being a carer is one of Australia's hardest jobs. Indeed. Our carers have dedicated their working lives to supporting our loved ones, from our younger citizens to our elder citizens. And caring is physical work, it's emotionally draining work, but it is also highly skilled work. But for far too long, these workers, aged care workers, early educators, have been underpaid and they've been undervalued. And that's not because these jobs are not skilled or because these jobs are not important. It is because these jobs are predominantly done by women. Yesterday's Fair Work Commission decision was a cost of living win for workers, but it was perhaps more importantly a win for Australian women. It was a signal that how this country views their work is changing. The Albanese government understands gender equality and economic reform go hand in hand, and there is no greater example of putting this policy into practice than our historic aged care pay rise. Labor promised and delivered a 15% increase to award wage minimums for 250,000 aged care workers, an $11.3 billion investment in the people who dedicate their working lives to caring for older Australians. This pay rise isn't just providing aged care workers with economic security, it is changing the system. I recently heard of an aged care worker named Danelle. She lives and works in Biloela in the member for Flynn's electorate. Danelle started her aged care career 20 years ago as an enrolled nurse. She then left and went to work in a hospital and became a registered nurse. But while working in hospitals, Danelle felt frustrated and she considered leaving nursing because she felt a huge amount of pressure about how little time she had to spend with her patients. So Danelle made a change. She moved north with her husband and her 2 sons. And I'm pleased to report Danelle has now returned to aged care after 20 years, and Danelle is thriving. She says that aged care has dramatically changed in the 20 years since she left it. She says now it feels like a family, not like a facility. Now it feels people-centred rather than institution-centred, because that is what happens when you invest in the care economy. That is what happens when you invest in women, in Australian women like Danelle. That is what happens when you prioritise a fairer future for all Australians.
Give the call to the honourable member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister explain the government's policy of watering down the entry requirements for service in the Australian Defence Force?
Good question. Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank the member for his question. Today we have announced that as of the 1st of July we will be enabling New Zealand citizens who have been permanent residents of our country for at least a year and who pass all the appropriate security checks which go with anyone who joins our Defence Force. We will be allowing those people to join our Defence Force. And that is a positive step forward in terms of increasing the pool of available people to join Australia's Defence Force. This was flagged in the National Defence Strategy, which I announced just over a month ago, that we would be looking to non-Australian non-Australians to join the Australian Defence Force with a view to dealing with the question of the recruitment and retention issues that we face within the Australian Defence Force, and not just that, but looking forward to 2040 to put ourselves in a position where we can grow the Australian Defence Force. Now, we know that when the Leader of the Opposition was the Minister for Defence, we saw the Australian Defence Force shrink. That is the reality of what we have faced. And since coming to power, we have improved the offer in terms of terms and conditions to those who serve in our nation's Defence Force through a better housing package, through retention bonuses, such that the separation rate in the Defence Force has fallen. And indeed, in respect of recruitment, we are starting to turn that around as well. But it is an important step to open the door to a broader range of people to join our Defence Force.
The Leader of the Opposition on point of order. Yep. I'll hear the point of order. I don't need assistance from members on my right.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It was a very tight question. The minister's advice now is contrary to, or at least deficient in its advice compared to the junior minister who provided a different account of how this would work. It goes well beyond New Zealand citizens, as you well know, and has broader application, and perhaps the minister could provide us with the actual detail.
So, once again, for the second time, he's arguing a point that wasn't in the question. I know he may now have further questions to ask regarding the minister's answer. He was asked about explaining the policy about entrance to the Australian Defence Force. Just Leader of the Opposition. Now, I'm unaware of any other announcements that's been made, so I can only deal with what he's been asked. If there's subsequent information that the Leader is requesting, he'll be able to do that another time. But for the time being, at this moment in time, he's been directly relevant. He's talking about the policy, how it happened, why it's happened, and the execution of the policy. So under the standing orders, he's been directly relevant.
Now thank you, Mr Speaker. We are in walking down this path, doing so in a careful and a slow and a calibrated way. As I've said, from the 1st of July, with those conditions in place around having been a permanent resident for a year at least, and the appropriate security checks, if you are from New Zealand, you'll be able to join the Defence Force. From the 1st of January, that will be extended to other Five Eyes countries. In the future, we are having an eye to the Pacific. That is what we are doing. But what we learn, Mr Speaker, from the question that has been asked by the Shadow Minister and from the interjection of the Leader of the Opposition now is there are no bounds that they won't cross in order to run a scare campaign and blow any single whistle that they can find.
Order. The member for Hawke has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government helping low-paid workers earn more and keep more of what they earn? What response has there been to the government's policies?
Give a call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and thank you. I thank the member for Hawke. In his electorate, as we count down to July 1, every single taxpayer is getting a tax cut, and every single award worker is getting a pay rise. Every single one of them. Both things happening that those opposite hate.
Order.
People are earning more and people are keeping more of what they earn. The decision from the Fair Work Commission yesterday, that 3.75% increase, comes on top of increase after increase after increase that happened when the government changed its policy. And those opposite hate it when they're reminded of it being a deliberate design feature to keep wages low. And they say, but it was only a comment that Matthias made and he didn't really mean it, the argument gets put. Apparently the fact that wages completely flatlined was just a coincidence. And also they ignore what changed. You see, this was a submission to the first annual wage review that we made a submission to in 2022. But this submission ended up not being taken into account by the Fair Work Commission because it's the one that they had put forward, which we asked to have withdrawn. And this one had section 7.1, Now, this is a chapter of the submission we decided to not include, called The Importance of Low-Paid Work. Those opposite were completely upfront that they wanted people to keep wages low. They did not want the Commission to make the orders that it's made. When loopholes arose that allowed the undercutting of wages, they wanted to leave the loopholes open. When you had a gig economy where people had no minimum standards at all, they liked it that way. When you had an enterprise agreement being undercut by labour hire, that was exactly what they wanted to have happen. Well, the difference now of 2 years, 2 years of different submissions being made to the rubbish that they used to put forward means, as a result of all of that, retail workers full-time will be seeing $102 a week extra in their bank account. Cleaners will be seeing $103 extra in their bank account. Hairdressers will be seeing $106 extra in their bank account. Aged care workers seeing an extra $200 in their bank account. And that's what you get as a result of 2 years' work where they have opposed it every step of the way. It took them their entire 10 years in office to get the minimum wage to move as far as it has moved under the Albanese Labor government in just 2 years. They want people to work longer for less. Under us, people will earn more and keep more of what they earn.
Prime Minister. Prime Minister has the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Ask further questions placed on the notice paper.